Welcome back to the Lanterne Rouge cycling podcast presented by Zwift, the online cycling platform that makes training fun. Here for the Strade Bianche 2022 recap, men and women's races. But first, the men's race. 185 Ks, not actually that long, but a very intense and hard race from Siena to Siena up to Piazza del Campo, a 700 meter 9% pinch at the end you'll be familiar with, where MVDP attacked Alaphilippe last year. We have 11 Starato white road gravel sections along the course, the longest being Monte San Marie with about 50 Ks to go, and the second longest called something Lodigiano d'Asso in the middle of the race. But we didn't have last year's winner MVDP. We didn't have 2020's winner Wout van Aert here. No Dumoulin. A lot of riders. Pidcock out with the stomach virus. So it was Alaphilippe and Pogačar, the two favourites for the race. But we had the man, Benji, in the break. We said he would. Taco, taco,
yes.
burrito, taco,
certainly. Jesus Christ. Yes, Taco van der Horn in the breakaway. It was rumored that Hausler was in there as well, but it didn't look like it was the second that the footage started rolling. In the end, that breakaway, while they were quite a few riders, they probably weren't going to make it towards the end. The only rider I had hope in was Taco van der Horn because it's Taco. So, the guy can keep on riding. Nonetheless, the action really started the second that the broadcast started. Actually, the second my broadcast started, something happened on a gravel section. And it's hard explaining how it happened or what happened, but on the fifth sector, Lucignano d'Asso, we saw basically a lot of people crashing. And I needed to slow motion picture to understand what happened, and it looked like there was some kind of heavy crosswind that came from one direction and slid into the riders, and as a consequence, an Alpecin rider at the front started moving towards the side of the road. Therefore, another rider was crashing due to that Alpecin rider, and a domino effect throughout the entire peloton. And who are the biggest victims? Well, Alaphilippe was in the field next to the road. We had the likes of Simmons, I think, a bit behind there as well. Pogačar fell over a rider. Benoit was crashed. Kampenaerts, Van Moer, Oldani, Mohoric, basically half the peloton, but quite a few DNFs came from that. But have you ever seen a crash like that ever?
It reminds me of, it was something you'd almost seen in Gent-Wevelgem 2015, where both there's a strong crosswind from the side, and I think it was just the wind on this exposed hill versus the gravel makes it even more difficult. Once the Alpecin's wheel started going to the left, no chance to correct. And he just plows straight into Alaphilippe, who was already unclipped in the gutter because he was getting buffeted by the wind. So terrible luck for Alaphilippe and for Lotto, really, because head-to-head Wellens is not on the level of Pogačar and Alaphilippe, and I thought they were going to play the Kampenaerts card up the road with numbers in the middle of the race, and he was out. Benoit for Jumbo out. So this really, really affected the race, namely because Alaphilippe, one of the top two favourites, is now chasing for, I think the biggest gap was a minute 50. He went down really hard, somersaulted over the front of his bike, lucky not to be injured. Hope he's okay. And we have a group with Pogačar ahead. And Seri, Benji, even pacing for Israel for a little bit, whilst Dries Devenijns wasn't.
Yeah, it seemed like Asgreen was probably trying to come back in the group behind that, but I didn't get it. I really didn't get why Seri was pacing. Devenijns being in the group, two quick-step riders, you don't pace in that case. Definitely if Alaphilippe is behind, but perhaps he was keeping the tempo in it, but I don't know why he would try and do that because your rider is behind, your leaders, both of them. Asgreen wasn't there either in the group yet, but the thing about Pogačar is he came back so swiftly. After the crash, that peloton group was like 7 riders, including the likes of Fulsang, who was still left, and Wellens, who also got around the crash relatively easily, I would dare to say. And yeah, that was not a group that I would say, oh, this group is going to keep on pacing. But like you say, City pacing was an odd move, quite certainly. Gradually, riders came back.
It was Alaphilippe, though, who had to I think he had to change bike or something because he was being paced by Honore a minute 30 behind. Lotto began to pace. It was a difficult effort. It reminded me, Benji, of what was the Jumbo Visma race with Wout van Aert where he had to come back like 3 times, or like in the middle of the race after a puncture last year. No, E3 or something. It ruined his race. If you get brought back in the middle of the race like that, even if you come back, how much does it cost Alaphilippe? How much is he banged up from the crash? But he eventually did come back. No one really, Pogacar doesn't really, he had no team to pace for him, for starters, to increase the pace. And Lotto also had no Campenaerts or Van Moors. So it's kind of Israel, but then Fulsang couldn't do anything. Clark's their leader. Alaphilippe eventually came back. There was a lull, which was good. I was like, okay, Alaphilippe's going to recover. 20-minute lull. Lull or lull? Monte Saint-Marie. Talk about this gravel section, Benji, and why it's so decisive in this race.
Well, basically, the initial part of that gravel section is not necessarily the Monte Saint-Marie climb. It's a up and down a bit, and then the proper climb starts, which is 1K at 10.3%, the steepest part of this gravel section, and that's where we saw the race open up the last 2 years. We saw Van Aert hammering that in previous years, Van der Poel hammering that in previous years, and that section, honestly, kind of blows up the race in every single edition of the last 2 at least. We've had a few editions before that where it didn't really affect the race as much, but recently that's the climax of the race that opens up everything, really. So I was expecting something to happen there, but with the effect of the crash happening, I didn't know which teams had the energy to do something, because we expected in our preview to be Lotto, and they lost 2 of their riders. So I saw 2 riders of them, and they seem to be moving to the front again before the Monte Saint-Marie section. So it looks like for Wellens, they were still trying to use that plan they probably had to hammer the Saint-Marie a bit and try and have an effect there. But once the first rider of Lotto is done, it is honestly up to Wellens already. And then you see that Alaphilippe is riding next to him already, that Pogacar is on the other side, and that it's basically already a leader versus leader, mano a mano on this Monte Saint-Marie section. And that's when Alaphilippe started going to the front and put a bit of a pressure on the group. And at first, it looked like he was gapping Wellens, and the rider that came past Wellens to close that down in a relatively easy tempo was Pogacar. He basically slid to the wheel of Alaphilippe without too much trouble, and the second that Alaphilippe stopped doing that, it was Pogacar that went on the left side of the road on the climb, and that attack was not final. The others were able to come back as they came towards the top of a hill, and at that point, I thought, okay, we've got a smaller group. This is kind of like last year. We had 7 riders last year. Unfortunately, no Gogol this year because he had already abandoned at this point in the race. But it's still a group that could make it relatively far. But it didn't have that same feeling as last year where it was like, 7 riders and then a huge gap. It felt like it was just riders behind each other with a few gaps in between. And to be honest, it took until the descent to make a decisive move, right?
Yeah, because Alaphilippe's attack reminded me of his Amstel-Kalberg attack last year, where I swear Alaphilippe attacks sometimes when he doesn't know what his legs are like. And he's like, let's see if they're good. And he just didn't get that separation or snap. We had Clark, Simmons, Valverde, Wellens there. As Benji said, all the leaders there, maybe even Koos was hanging around.
Yep.
Simon Clark on the front entering this steep descent section, and Pogacar comes around the outside of him. No one really sighted him and just slams this descent. Full gas, on the limit, bike moving everywhere, chasing the moto, and he gets a 5-second, 7-second gap straight away. And it's crazy seeing the back-to-back Tour de France winner, the favourite for the Tour this year, Grand Tour contender, just going full gas, pedal to the metal on a gravel descent with 50 Ks to go in Strade, and Alaphilippe didn't respond. He just attacked. Clark couldn't respond. It's just, there's no Wout van Aert and MVP here. Pidcock's not here, and it already looked like guys were already a bit on the limit. Asgreen had been pacing a bit for Alaphilippe, who came into his own later in the race, and very, very quickly, as Pogacar gets onto the next part of Monte Saint-Marie.
Rodriguez!
Yeah. He only has, didn't you remove that designation from him, Benji? Isn't that Christian Rodriguez now?
I've never formally actually acknowledged who the actual Rodriguez is. I'm just betting on two horses right now, hoping that they both don't notice. So for now, they're both Rodriguez until someone calls me out on it.
I just did. But I think we should. I think we should go with the Ineos one. I think the Ineos Rodriguez is the better one.
I think so as well.
In the future. But yeah, what did you think of that move from him? Like, commentators were talking about it. It's an interesting point. He's dangling 18 seconds behind Pogacar. Pogacar's got 30 seconds on the peloton, quote unquote. It's like 10 guys, Alaphilippe pacing for Asgreen. I guess there's two mindsets. If he wants to win, he has to chase Pogacar. If he wants the podium, he should sit up for the group.
Yep, I agree. But on the other hand, he's a young guy. He probably doesn't have the experience to think about this himself at that point in the race. Sure, some riders will be able to say, I should better wait to be able to do this. But on the other hand, the exposure of him being in second in that race, in a race like Strade, is huge for getting people to like him as a cyclist. And I think that also does quite a bit. That's probably not the thought process he had, but I would love this guy a lot more if he just keeps riding 20 to 30k in second position in between the two groups, and he's on camera all the time trying his best to hold on to a little bit of a gap between him and Pogacar, and he actually did that. So I like that aspect. Yes, it's not the most tactical idea. Sure, it was probably better to be able to drop back and then go from there. But on the other hand, they had Narvaez in the group behind. Perhaps they were thinking, let's let the other people chase down Rodriguez first, and then try something with Narvaez for the podium.
At this point, I promptly hopped on Zwift, our show partner, because I thought this was a wrap. I thought it was done. I was like, only one man can stop Pogacar at this point, and it's me. So I need to get Rocky mode, insert Zwift training montage. I need to get started doing 125 watts for 40 minutes watching the finale of this race. But if you want to check out a Zwift event, Cancellara was a triple winner of Strade Bianche. And if today has you in the mood for channeling your inner Spartacus, Zwift have a chasing Cancellara ride over next weekend. You unlock a jersey for completing either stage. So make sure you check that out from our show partner, Zwift. Pogacar's gone. The group is at a minute 30. Rodriguez is at 45, 50 seconds. Pogacar appears to be bleeding from his back. I think where he landed, maybe his radio's cut him, or there's some sort of abrasion. He's got a cut in his left elbow. He's looking good. Let's cut to the chase. I thought this race was a wrap, and it was. Pogacar solos 50 Ks to the finish. He started to have some back discomfort in the last 15 kilometers. The closest the gap got down to was 50 seconds when Asgreen started pacing a group with Wellens, Narvaez, Simmons, and Valverde. Valverde refused to contribute because Valverde's been saying for 2 years he doesn't ride for the win. He said in Liège last year he let it out because he thought he might get third. So he's not riding for the win, didn't contribute. Asgreen attacks him. Valverde teleports to him. Whatever. Race is over. Pog wins. First Tour de France winner to win Strade Bianche, I think. I'll just read up top 10. Valverde beats Asgreen after bridging to him and sitting on him for second. Asgreen third. Benji's Volta proving me wrong in fourth. Bilbao fifth. I knew he'd have top 10. Narvaez sixth, Simmons seventh, Wellens eighth, Simone Patelli for Intermarché ninth, and Agita 10th. But it's all that Pog, Benji. What do you say to the people, a bit like me, who are like, that top 10, it ain't Pidcock van Aert MVDP. I would say still a 50k solo is mental, no matter who's behind.
Yeah, certainly. I feel like races with a lesser start list aren't necessarily worse races. It depends on how the race is ridden, and that's delivered once again. Pogacar probably thought 50k from the line, oh, I'm cold, in the same way that Van der Poel did last year in Tirreno, and said, I'll go ahead and attack right now. And in all honesty, the way he did it is magnificent. Being able to attack, being able to keep for 50 kilometers, because we saw in that 50k solo at Castelfidardo by Van der Poel, towards the end he was really having trouble. Yes, the gap went down here once again as well with Pogacar, but the guy was riding solo for 50k. Now, yeah, I think it's as simple as that. Pogacar was the best rider on the road today by quite a bit. And sure, the riders behind are not terrible either. Like an Asgreen, winner of RVV last year. Yes, last week he wasn't the most impressive Asgreen yet, but he's clearly upping his form towards the April Classics, and he's looking good for those quite certainly. Attila Valter, he actually, like you said, attacked away on the latter, I think it was Letolfe section, from the peloton group to the group of like Wellens and so forth, and then ended up getting that fourth spot. Ex-mountain biker, I think that's where he's got his gravel skills, and as a consequence was pretty good here. On that note, I will take a look where Milan Valder ended, 50th, okay, on 8 minutes 23. I was hoping for a bit better, personally.
I would say tactically we keep seeing long solos working, and I can't see Pogacar's data, I can't see Asgren's data, but where he attacked, for starters, he gets 5-10 seconds based on Clark not reacting straight away on the descent, immediately. Secondly, no one behind him had a domestique at that point, and Asgren and Alaphilippe hadn't figured out who was the leader, and Alaphilippe eventually paced after a while. That's the second thing that helps. Third thing, let's be honest, the motorbikes, they consistently give guys going solo an advantage. Like, they are so close. You got one front, one behind, Burt Block and studying it. They make a real difference, the motorbikes. Fourthly, Pogacar loves to do his own pace at his threshold on the longest climb of the day, solo, whilst everyone's having to chase behind, because he's probably the best on the longest climb, and he gets to go do the climb himself. And fifthly, trusting in the lack of group dynamics behind is something we can almost guarantee every time. And even if it's not in their favor, like, it's different, Benji. Liège, after the final climb, the group of five, when Valverde refuses to pull, that is smart because there's nowhere to head. So safe for the sprint. Now, going in front, leading out the sprint, don't know what you're thinking there, buddy. But when there's someone ahead, I know this is rocket science. If you don't catch the rider ahead, you can't win the race. You can't. So that's generally something ignored by chase groups. So I think tactically it was a great way to go, but you still would have the legs. Like, still mental, 50k solo. Could anyone have done anything differently, Benji? I think it's hard to criticize Quickstep with Alaphilippe crashing that hard.
Yeah, I think so. Well, except for the city pacing and so forth, that's a bit of an odd thing that happened. But towards the end of the race, I think there's not much you can say about them. I enjoyed that they switched to Asgreen relatively early because it was noticeable that if the race opens up on Monte Santa Maria, it's going to be a harder race of attrition. We know that Asgreen's better on harder races of attrition than Alaphilippe is quite clearly in every race of his past. And as a consequence, Asgreen has the advantage there. And therefore, I love that they switched that so swiftly and that Alaphilippe felt like working for Casper on this ride after trying to come back himself as well. And like, we're talking about those, but there's also a few people in that top 10 that I perhaps wouldn't have expected in the top 10, like a Simone Petilli, for example. Higuita, like, is it the weather that is making him shit at these hilly races? Because in the rain, he's not good at them, and in the sun, he's amazing at them.
I don't know. Maybe the debate we're about to have after the women's recap, it's because Strade shouldn't be a monument, but we'll get to that. Hold that thought. That was the men's race. Incredible for Pogacar. We'll see him at Tirreno Adriatico against Jonas Vingegaard and Remco Evenepoel next week. We'll have recaps of every stage. That will be unbelievably good. We have Paris-Nice, obviously, tomorrow with the most stacked start list apart from Pogacar there. So 2 incredible stage races coming up. But hopefully Pogacar's recovered, Benji, because he did. Like, he might pull up tomorrow morning fucked and be like, my back is crook. So hopefully he's all right for Tirreno, because that would be a shame. But the big debate, Benji, should Strade Bianche be a monument? The only, for reference, everybody, a monument kind of is an irrelevant status. Instead, except for the UCI minimum prize money being a little bit higher. That's really all it means. There's 5 monuments: Sanremo, Liège, Lombardia, Ronde van Vlaanderen, and Roubaix. I know you're a big Strade should be a monument Benji guy. Here's the chance for you to stake your case. Yeah, you are. You sit in that case.
Are you sure about that?
I mean,
I'm not even sure I am in that camp.
well, maybe you aren't after this race. I think before you were.
It depends for me. So I have a hard time with the definition of a monument because every single person you ask what a monument means says something different. Over the last couple of years, I heard everything from, oh, they were races that mean something for the World War, which is nothing to do with why it's called monument, most likely. Next to that, there's people that were saying, oh, it's the tradition of having a very old race that has a lot of history, that therefore also, yeah, has a lot of winners in the past that were big cyclists. Other reasons is that, oh, it's a kind of race where you don't necessarily know whether the race is going to be won in one way or the other, or by one type of rider or the other. And in certain occasions, that's true because bunchers have won Lombardia, climbers have won Lombardia. Paris-Roubaix is usually won by a guy that can cobble pretty well, unless you're in the breakaway early, but you probably need to cobble pretty well as well, Heyman style. And then if you look at RVV, it can be done by long solos or a sprint in the end in previous years as well. And then we'll look at, for example, Milano San Remo, perhaps the more different type of winners edition of the monuments that is there, because you have sprinters that won it in the past with Oscar Freire, for example. You had surprise victories with Schiolek and so forth, Alaphilippe punchers. You had riders in between sprinters and punchers like Van Aert, for example. You had climbers like Vincenzo Nibali who got away in that way. So basically, that's also a theory. And honestly, I don't really care that much about those theories. I think that a race should be a monument if a lot of people find it extremely popular and therefore it's becoming one of the more intriguing races in the sport and therefore one of the more entertaining races in the sport, because I want the monuments to be the ones that are attracting the people to the sport. And I think Strade Bianche is definitely one that does that. Does it deserve to be a monument? Perhaps not yet. Perhaps it needs a few more years to build up to tradition because it's a very young race. It like
Well,
10 years
Cofidis
ago,
didn't turn up.
it wasn't even called Strade Bianche 10 years ago, right? It was
Yeah.
Monte Paschi Eroica or something.
Eroica Pasci, yeah, something like that.
So it's like it's lacking a few things for me yet to get to that status, but I would like monuments to be the races that get people, the one-day races that get people to watching the sport, and Strade is one of them.
Last year, we saw a group with MVDP, Wout van Aert, Bernal, Pogacar, Alaphilippe, Simmons, Goggle. And I was like, this is an incredible mix of riders, Grand Tour contenders, punchers, rouleurs, classics men, unbelievable. And that's what is really exciting, and any of them have a chance to win. I do think I look at this top 10 and I'm like, this is, yeah, it's not like Simone, no offense to the guy, but Simone Patelli, ninth, Volta fourth. Like
Mate,
it's
Oliver Zauch won in Lombardia.
True, yeah. But true, yeah. But I mean, I don't know. You have Wout van Aert and Jumbo being like, I'm good, not doing it. I don't think it's a priority the same way Milano San Remo is. I do think monument status matters to riders because they get a different bonus. I assume you get a bigger bonus if you win MSR to Strade on average if they're doing their contracts correctly. But in terms of viewership, like Dan Lloyd will know better than we do. They have the numbers. Like I wouldn't be surprised if he's like, we get way more viewers on Strade than Lombardia. I would be shocked if that wasn't the case. So viewership and interest, if that's the determinant, then you can't say Strade can't be in. Even if it's all about history, then yeah, it won't be in. If it's about how hard it is, well, per hour, I think they burn more kilojoules per hour last year than in the Tour of Flanders.
Yeah, but if you look at the history theory, then not a single race done by the women can be a monument yet. Until it's like 30 years later, and then it's like,
True, yeah.
This race should be a monument now. So that's stupid. Like, it's the same issue with women's cycling, where I'm trying to figure out which races deserve a monument status, and then you come to races like Trofeo Alfredo Binda that deserve it more than some races that are monuments in men's cycling, and therefore aren't necessarily old in women's cycling yet, don't have that history in that, but should deserve a monument status because they were old in men's cycling? I don't think so. Like, It's
Well,
it's a it's a marketing term.
it is, well, exactly. We'll finish with, I think you're getting to where almost I stand on this. My view is I don't care. I think as a I'm from Australia. I wasn't born and raised in cycling. When I hear the word monument, I'm like, what is
Santos
I
Tour Down Under.
well, yeah, Santos Festival of Cycling. If you win that, look at Luke Platt, mate. Tour de France, look out. Yeah, I just think it doesn't matter. I don't care. And if I was a rider's agent, which I'm hoping to be, and I was negotiating bonuses, I would be arguing that Strade should get the same level of bonus as other races, like the monuments, because it's as hard to win. Like you look at the start list, the winners list, and you need to be top level to win it, and it's huge interest for your brand, and you got the whole big tire stuff. But that's a separate discussion. End of the day, I don't care. I think it's a good race, and
Next to that,
yes,
I think that rating races is annoying
it is.
because
Yeah,
I feel like additions is what I always rate. Gent-Wevelgem 2012 was amazing. Paris-Roubaix 2016 was amazing, except for the fact that Heyman beat Tom Bonen. That's like the bad part of that race.
shout out
Let's be
Zwift.
honest about it.
Swift
Ah,
better
come on.
training than Belgium's cobbled roads.
Damn you. But then we look at, what is it? I think there's quite a few editions of races. Like, even when talking about Tirreno last year, Tirreno is not amazing because that one edition was amazing. We've had very shit Tirreno editions in the past.
Yeah.
We've had very shit Paris-Nice editions. We've had very good Paris-Nice editions, like the one where we had those early stages with the Mar versus Alaphilippe on those short hills and so forth. That was content. That was amazing. And I feel like rating editions against each other is much more meaningful than rating races, because at the end of the day, you can have a shit edition of a monument any day. You can have a wonderful edition of a monument any day. Weather plays a role in that. Star list plays a role in that. Injuries play a role in that. Everything play a role in that. And I don't really care if it gets a monument status or not. Strade Bianche, it's one of my favorite races of the year. I thoroughly enjoyed my day.
If anyone can write in the comments the objective meaning of monument status outside of UCI points attributed to it, which is arbitrary, then let us know. But yeah, it varies by edition. As someone who buys race rides and looks at start lists very closely, I was like, ooh, Tirreno last year, those would have been some good rides to have. Anyway, Strade weekend. We'll be back tomorrow with Paris-Nice Stage 1. Then we'll be double-headed with Paris-Nice Tirreno next week. Incredible stage racing action. I'll have highlights of Paris-Nice every night on my channel as well, the Lanterne Rouge YouTube channel. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks to Zwift for being our show partner, and we'll see you tomorrow. Ciao.